So I wanted to thank everyone for being here today, and I would like to thank and welcome Bob Corcoran for being here with us today. He has been a great partner of DSAP for many years through workshops like this, as well as through his work with the Notre Dame Club of Pittsburgh. And Bob has been a financial advisor with a connection, or I'm sorry, a concentration, particularly in the area of special needs planning. And we are so happy to have him with us today to share a lot of information to address the unique financial opportunities available for our families. So, Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Mara, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess. We're going to run through this presentation. It usually takes about 40 minutes. You may have some questions as you go through. I would just ask that you hold your questions to the end, and hopefully we'll have some time. I'll try my best to answer any questions that pop up. And if we can't answer them right here and right now, we'll certainly follow up. So,
Bob, I
um,
just want to let everyone know they can also put their questions in the chat if they want to like parking lot them somewhere, and then we can come back to them at the end because I know that I would totally forget them if I had to hang on to it. So
it's
pop them in
perfect.
the chat, everyone.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. So, we're here today to talk about providing quality of life for your loved ones, and hopefully everyone can see the screen. Mara, you can see the screen, right? Good, just to be sure. And what that means. So, I've been doing a workshop like this for over 20 years, and I was just saying to Mara, I'm always stunned by what a revelation some of this stuff is to people as we go through it. And hopefully not that I want to stun anyone, but hopefully it's informative for you. So certainly let me know when we're all said and done here if it's been helpful. Just to be clear, I am a CPA, I'm a financial advisor, and I have been working in this arena for 22, 23 years. It's a very specialized area, but I'm not here to give anyone individual advice. I don't know any of you well enough to be able to do that. The purpose is to give you information, to give you some more food for thought, maybe point you to some resources, maybe make you aware of some things you weren't otherwise aware of, so that you can begin the process if you haven't begun it already. Planning for a child with special needs, and when I say, I'll use that term a lot, child with special needs, and when I say child, I mean we're all someone's child, right? So it's not a particular age. One of my special needs children is in his late 50s, and his mother is still his chief caregiver, and she's in her early 80s. So when I say child, we'll use that term loosely. It's your child is your child forever. And some folks are, in fact, children forever. So we're going to be talking about quality of care and the quality of life for your child for their lifetime, regardless of their age. Oftentimes, I'm asked, people in my position are asked, what's going to happen when I'm gone? Parents will say, well, as long as we're drawing breath, my spouse and I will take care of our child. It's when we're gone that there's an issue. And we're going to talk about the kinds of planning you need to think about doing so that the quality of care and the quality of life you want for your child will continue even if you're not here anymore. That's kind of a tough subject, but it's an important one. And frankly, it's one that folks often don't address unless they attend a function like this, a workshop like this. And that's not to be critical. I understand most of you are busy fighting off the alligators every day. You don't have time to drain the swamp. But we're going to talk about draining the swamp a little bit here today. Um, you really need to do proper planning, and you really need to talk to folks that understand the kind of planning that you need to do. That it's not common. There aren't that many attorneys that do this kind of work. There aren't that many financial advisors that do this kind of work, and there are virtually no CPAs that do this kind of work. It's just not something that CPAs are trained in. Um, So you want to find someone that understands the process and works in this arena. This shouldn't be a test case for your advisor, whoever your advisor is. Um, it's really different than general estate planning, because the things you normally do in estate planning, and I've done estate planning most of my career. The kinds of goals you have when you're doing estate planning generally are a little different. Typically, it's tax minimization, and privacy might be a part of it. There are other aspects that are a part of it, but often tax minimization is the goal, whereas preserving the benefits available to your child, um, and why that matters are really typically the key when we're talking about special needs planning. And we're going to get into some of those kinds of details here in a moment. The big threshold, the big thing to keep in mind is the $2,000 limit. Essentially, Medicaid and SSI are the two government benefits that are key for your child. You want your child to be Medicaid eligible. And the government essentially says that if you have more than $2,000 in your name, you will no longer be eligible for most governmental benefits, including Medicaid. You may say, well, I'm already getting those kind of benefits. My child's 5 years old. Well, in Pennsylvania, we have something called medical assistance, and that will take care of your child, will provide you some benefits through your child's age 18. At 18, they become an adult. And at 18, they're measured on their own resources. So parents are often kind of stunned by this idea that my child is still my child is still living at home, I'm still taking care of them, but they're now your adult child at 18. And you want to be careful not to leave assets to your adult child and disqualify them from governmental benefits. You may be getting benefits from resources from your school, uh, grade school, high school. Well, the high school resources are going to end now in Pennsylvania at age 22. It's a cliff. So there are these different threshold years that you need to be aware of when it comes to your child and your child's benefits. But the one we're going to spend a lot of time on is 18, your child becoming an adult at 18. So it's important that you do the right kind of planning before your child gets to that point, so that it's not an issue uh, by their 18th birthday. Two basic programs that I mentioned, SSI and Medicaid. It's Medi-Cal in California. We're not in California, so we're going to focus on Medicaid. SSI is an income program. It's meant to provide a stipend, a few $100 a month. What is it now? 750 or in that ballpark, to pay for basic assistance, food, clothing, shelter. Medicaid is meant to be health care for your child. And that's really the big nut for most people, right? That if your child has a serious medical condition, if you don't have the benefit of Medicaid, you're going to wind up spending your resources on healthcare, where those resources could be used for other quality of life issues for your child. And again, more on that in a moment. Um, so these two things are similar but not the same. It's possible to get Medicaid without being on SSI, but if you're SSI qualified, you're automatically Medicaid qualified. So for most people, if you can get qualified for SSI, it's important that you do so when the time comes. Some folks I run into look at this as a negative, that we don't need that. We can do without that. It's somehow demeaning, to be on the dole in some folks' eyes. I'm going to encourage you not to think like that. There are things your child is going to need. There are programs that your child won't be able to qualify for unless they're Medicaid qualified. So you want to think in terms of keeping them Medicaid qualified throughout their life. I mentioned I'm a CPA and a financial advisor. I'm not a lawyer. I have standing agreement with all my legal friends. I won't practice law without a license. If they won't practice financial planning without a license, we get along just fine. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the legal tools that you need to be aware of. Um, just so you know the terminology and you know what questions to ask when the time comes. You probably will need to speak to an attorney that works in this arena when the time comes. Um, Questions like, do I do I need a will? If I poll the people in the room, and I've done this over the years, for all the years I've done this, typically more than half the people in the room don't have a will. Um, why do I need one? We'll talk about that here in a second. And how's that different from a living trust? How's that different from a trust generally? When do I need which? And what other kinds of documents do I need? Um, you're also going to have to think about guardianship. Guardianship is guardianship and conservatorship. I guess I'd explain this way. Guardianship is protection of a person. Conservatorship is protection of assets. Um, who will take care of your child when you're not here anymore? Would you like to have a say so in who that is? Because ultimately, if the parents aren't here and they haven't done the uh, appropriate paperwork, a judge will decide essentially who's going to care for your child. And does your child need to have ongoing care? Do you want your child to be able to live as an adult and make decisions on their own? Essentially, if you, at 18, if you have them declared um, not capable, uh, then they'll be considered a child forever. Do you want that? Your child may need that, but do you want that? Does your child want that? So it's not a decision you want to make lightly. It's something you're going to want to give thought to. You don't need to worry about that till they are an adult. When they're a minor, they're in the care of their parents. But at 18, a decision will have to be made. Do you want to have, does your child need to have guardianship? And what do you lose in translation by having guardianship in place? In other words, would your child be able to sign a contract, rent an apartment, buy a car? Maybe those are things that are never going to happen, but if you want them to happen, um, guardianship may be too extreme a move. I'm not advocating for or against it. I'm saying these are questions that you need to be asking as you're going along. Let me go back to wills and trusts for a second. The question about do I need a will? Folks will say to me, "Well, we don't really have that much in the way of assets," and I hear that probate is this big daunting thing and it's expensive, and maybe we can get away without that. I've got, let's say, I've got uh, two two kids, little Johnny and little Susie. Little Susie has Down syndrome. I'm going to leave everything to little Johnny and he'll do the right thing when the time comes. That's a horribly bad idea. That's a horribly bad idea for several reasons. Disinheriting your child with special needs in order to maintain their Medicaid qualification is not a good idea. Leaving assets to somebody else, even if they're well-meaning, can have some really unintended outcomes. For example, little Johnny may grow up and get married, and like more than half the people in the country get divorced, and now his ex-spouse has entitlement rights to the assets you intended for little Susie. Or little Johnny might grow up and, God forbid, have a drug or alcohol problem. Little Johnny may run a stop sign and run into Bob Corcoran, and now Mrs. Corcoran has entitlement rights to the assets you intended for little Susie. Um, And sadly, I could tell you more stories than you have time to hear about uncles, cousins, siblings who, once they had access to assets, misunderstood that the purpose was to take care of the person with special needs. They didn't understand the concept of being a fiduciary. It's a high bar. And I would tell you that if most people understood what the word fiduciary meant, they would never agree to do it. Um, it's a high bar. You want to be very careful about um, simply disinheriting a loved one to avoid the basic paperwork necessary to ensure that things are done the right way. A will dictate who takes care of your minor children in the event something happens to you, and will also dictate where your assets should go in the event something happens to you. Typically in Pennsylvania, it will go to a spouse, and then on a contingent basis to whoever you dictate in your will. Um, in Pennsylvania, like every other state in the union, if you don't have a will, the laws of intestacy will dictate where that money goes. So if you don't have a will and you have assets, um, and otherwise don't have a trust, if you have a will, I'm sorry, if you don't have a will and have assets, the state will dictate who gets your assets. Your spouse will get some and your kids will get some, including your child with special needs. So back to the issue of, I don't want my child with special needs to have assets in their own name because it'll disqualify them from Medicaid. That's not good. That's a problem. How do you avoid that problem? Well, the one and only practical way to do that, the one and only sound way to do that, is by using something called a special needs trust. A special needs trust is a document that says that the assets I intended for little Susie are going to go into the trust for the benefit of little Susie, um, and be administered in such a way that Medicaid qualification will continue. So there are certain things that the money can be spent on and other things that should not be spent on. Okay. So that document stands in the place of the individual so that you don't have to disinherit your children. You can say, I want half my money to go to little Johnny and the other half to go not directly to little Susie, but to the special needs trust for her benefit. There are a couple of different ways to cause that to happen, and we're going to go through that. But broadly, that's the idea that you use a special needs trust to stand in the place of that person for their benefit. There are no dollar limits on how much can be put in it. You can add to it later. Anyone can add to it. There can be more than one trust. It may not be necessary to have more than one, but you could have more than one. It can be funded by parents or grandparents or siblings or anyone. If it's funded by a third party, meaning anyone but the child themselves, there's no payback provision. What does that mean? There are two kinds of trust. First party, third party are the two kinds. First party being the person themselves, the special needs person themselves. So little Susie might create a trust for herself, let's say, or someone may do it for her in her name if she has assets in her name. For example, a personal injury lawsuit settlement, or an auto accident settlement, an inheritance that they get past age 18 because a special needs trust wasn't set up in the first place as a beneficiary, right? So the well-intentioned great Aunt Maud leaves something in her will to little Susie, who's now 25, but on Medicaid. And great Aunt Maud has just disqualified little Susie. Um, how do you get around that? Well, little Susie can take her inheritance and create a first party special needs trust. The downside of that is that it maintains her Medicaid qualification, but because it was created by her with her assets or for her with her assets, Medicaid can be paid back for anything it paid out during her lifetime. If that trust was created as a third party trust by the parents or by great Aunt Maud or by whomever for the benefit of little Susie, then there is no payback provision. And anything remaining in the trust at little Susie's passing can then go to any other family member, any other person dictated by the grantor of the trust or a charity or whomever. So the most efficient thing to have would be a third party trust. And a first party trust is kind of a fallback or to be used in special circumstances, let's say. There's also something called a pool trust. You may hear that term. Certain charities like the Family Trust at Achieva, Life Enrichment Trust in the North Hills, other organizations like that manage special needs trusts. They're set up as charities. And for folks that don't have really extensive assets, they can be an alternative. Uh, but like a first party trust, any remainder in the trust at the passing of the special needs person reverts to the charity, not to Medicaid, but to the charity. So that's a third version, if you will. Any trust requires a trustee. A trustee can be a person or an entity. Again, I'm not an attorney, but in my experience, I think individuals are better served to have a corporate trustee manage the trust. Why? For a couple of reasons. Corporations never die. A corporation will be there forever, essentially, or its successor will be. Whereas if you name an individual, tomorrow's promised to no one, including the person, the brother, the cousin, the uncle, the aunt that you wanted to name as trustee. And back to my earlier point, most individuals truly don't understand what it means to be a fiduciary, that the assets in the trust are to be managed under a fiduciary standard solely for the benefit of the special needs person. Many individuals have a hard time with that concept. Corporations that are built for this, charitable organizations that are built for this, um, do understand that standard and can be held to it. A special needs trust I mentioned isn't necessarily for everything. It's not meant to be a bank account. It's not a demand account. Let's put it that way, right? Where the special needs person walks in and says, "I'd like $10,000 and I want to give it to my friend, or I want to use it for whatever purpose." There's a specified list of things for which those funds can be used. It's a pretty broad list. Personal care attendants, vacations, clothing, some home furnishings. Buying a home is kind of a tricky proposition. It's possible. It's not meant for food and shelter. Um, we'll talk about that in a little more detail, but it's meant for essentially any quality of life issues. It's not meant to pay medical bills. That's what Medicaid's for. So essentially, it's meant to pay for all the things that Medicaid won't pay for, and none of the things Medicaid will pay for. So an example I sometimes use is if your family wants to go to Disney on vacation, Medicaid is not going to pay for that, but the special needs trust can pay for that. If your child needs a wheelchair, Medicaid will pay for the wheelchair, but it won't buy a van with a lift to get the wheelchair from A to B, but the special needs trust can pay for that. So it's meant to pay for things that Medicaid won't otherwise pay for. It's not meant to pay for food and shelter generally. That's what essentially SSI is meant to pay for. Another way you can pay for those things, food and some living expenses, is something called an ABLE account. Um, Achieving a better life experience. This law was passed as a way for individuals with special needs to set aside some dollars. It is built on the same chassis as a 529 plan, a college savings account, if you're familiar with that. The threshold on these has been raised. It used to be that um, the disability had to have been incurred before age 26. That's been extended to 46 as of January 1st of this year. Um, and it can be used for daily living expenses. It can be a good repository for, let's say, your child with special needs has a job once they reach adulthood and they're able to work in some form or fashion. Where do you put that money? If you put it in a checking account, as soon as it reaches $2,000, they're disqualified from Medicaid. So that won't work. Um, there are some ways to shelter those dollars, but one way to do it would be to put it in an ABLE account instead of in a checking account, because the ABLE account is exempt. It's not considered it is not considered an includable asset. It again has to be used. The money has to be spent in a certain way, um, but let's say, a little looser than the rules involving a special needs trust. There are some limitations on how much it can accumulate and how much can be given to it. So it's not, from where I stand, a replacement for a special needs trust, but it's a complement to a special needs trust, and can be used for. Here's a really silly example, if you will. Special needs trust can buy your child a ticket to the movies, but it shouldn't buy popcorn at the movies because that's food. The ABLE account can pay for that. The ABLE account can pay for the popcorn. So things like that. There are some nuances to how these things can be used, and you can get advice from a number of different organizations if you're unclear about just how they should be used. How much is enough to fund a special needs trust, and where will it come from? What kinds of funding should I use? Well, you can put almost anything in a special needs trust. A lot of folks will say, I want my child to continue to live in our home. But if your home is like my home, my home doesn't make me money. My home costs me money. I have to pay the utilities. I have to get the grass cut. Um, there's maintenance and upkeep. If there's a mortgage, you've got to pay a mortgage. So there better be some revenue coming in if you're going to do that. Your home isn't really a money-making asset. Uh, if you want to be able to fund your child's needs going forward, you're going to want to put something in there that will generate an income. That can be cash, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. It can come from a variety of individuals. Um, it can come from the individual's earnings. It can, I'll put an asterisk on that. It can come from the individual's earnings, depending on the nature of the trust. More likely, it can come from a parent's earnings, or gift, grandparents, siblings, um, potentially also from the government, like Social Security, for example. By the way, Social Security and Social Security disability income are often confused with SSI and Medicaid. Those are two different things. So get familiar with the fact that Social Security is an earnings-based program, right? Social Security and Social Security disability income are based on an individual's earnings or potentially their parents' earnings, whereas SSI and Medicaid are entitlement programs and not based on a person's earnings. They're based on a person's financial need. So those terms are not interchangeable. So make sure you understand the difference between them. Um, Back to funding sources for a special needs trust. It can be real property, it can be investments, it can be retirement funds. Retirement funds are a little tricky because of the peculiar rules with, yeah, they're tax deferred, but at some point, typically you've got to take distributions. Um, when you do take those distributions, they're taxable typically. So you've got to be very careful with using retirement funds as a funding vehicle for a special needs trust. It can be done, but you have to be careful of the tax traps. Um, Insurance can be a funding vehicle for a special needs trust. And we find in particular for parents with younger children, very young children, insurance is often the most efficient way to fund the trust. Why? Because typically there's no need to fund the trust today if your child is two and you're otherwise in good health. The need is sometime in the future. And that need could be a very large number in the future. And God forbid your child might predecease you. There may not be a need to fund the trust at all. If you take your assets and fund it today, put it in a trust, you may not be able to get at those dollars if you need them for yourself. That may not be a good solution. Um, so, in a situation where parents say, as long as we're both here drawing breath, we'll take care of our child. It's when we're gone, there's an issue. That's a situation that frankly calls for a life insurance solution. On the other hand, if the child has inherited money or there's some kind of windfall that's come in for whatever reason, funding it with investments or current dollars, and depending on the child's age, might be the better way to go. If you do fund it with insurance, it creates an instant estate. It's, if it's structured correctly, income tax free. It can be structured to be inheritance tax free. Um, for most individuals, the estate tax threshold is so large that it's likely, very likely, going to be estate tax free. Um, it can be designed to fit in your budget because it can be designed to be either term insurance or permanent insurance. It can have a guaranteed death benefit. It does have a guaranteed death benefit, but the length of time it's guaranteed for is a function of is it term or permanent insurance. And if you need more information on the distinctions between those, I can provide that, or any insurance advisor can provide that. Um, what kind of insurance, if you're going with insurance, what kind is best for special needs trust? Well, again, individual term, whole life, universal life, indexed universal life, variable universal life are all types of life insurance. One you may not know about that is an estate planning tool that's been around for a long time is something called survivorship life insurance or second to die. It's a policy on two people, typically mother and father, that pays a death benefit at the second death. Again, most parents would say, as long as we're both here, we'll take care of our child. It's when we're gone, there's an issue. A survivorship policy fits that scenario. And because it's only paying a death benefit at the second death, it's typically less expensive than a policy on either of the two individuals. Is it the right solution? I don't know. But be aware that it's a tool, it's out there. It may be a fit for your situation. How much is enough? That's really hard to say. Projecting future expenses, especially for a very young child, I find is a very difficult thing to do. There are some tools out there that can help you do this. Various financial institution put calculators out there that do this using some reasonable rate of return and some projection um, of the income flow and your child's expenses. But I would tell you, I've seen a study from the state of Pennsylvania. It's now a couple of years old. It said the average family in Pennsylvania at that point was spending something like $16,000 a year out of pocket over and above any benefits they were getting from the government. That doesn't sound like all the money in the world, but how much would I have to put in a stack earning 4% to throw off a $16,000 income for the rest of my child's life? It's a pretty big number. I think you're going to find that number is like four or $500,000. Is that how much you need? Again, I don't know the answer to that. But don't be surprised if the need that's calculated for especially a young child turns out to be a very large number because your child, especially your child with Down syndrome, may live a very long time. And the benefit they need may be a very large number. Something else to think about that has nothing to do with the money, has nothing to do with legal documents, but it has everything to do with the quality of life of your child is a letter of intent or memorandum of intent. It's not a legal document. What it is a note to the babysitter as if you're going to the movies and never coming home. How will someone care for your child the way you want your child to be cared for? Who knows that your child won't take their meds unless they're wearing their favorite red sweater? Who knows which pediatricians you want your child to go to and which ones you never want your child to go to? Who else knows what their favorite cereal is? Um, Little things like that. Um, it can be as long or as short as you want it to be. Several, again, organizations make a format of a letter of intent available to you. Um, and it's open-ended. It's a guide. It's a way for you to convey to somebody else who has it in their heart to care for your child, how to care for your child. And I would definitely recommend that you consider having something like that, even if it's simple to start with, so that the next caregiver knows how to give care. I mentioned lawyers, and if I came off sounding negative about lawyers, I want to be clear that I'm not. You absolutely have to have a good attorney who understands special needs planning, just like you need to have a financial professional that understands the vagaries of special needs planning, and they need to work in conjunction, ideally with um, a trust company if you're going to use a corporate trustee. So there are several individuals with unique skills in their own areas um, that are your team. And that's the best approach. It's pretty hard to find one person that can do all those things and do them correctly uh, in the best interest of your child. Those people exist. They're out there. And organizations like DSAP can direct you to some of the folks in our area that do that kind of work. Um, Obviously, I do this kind of work and I meet with individuals on a no fee basis just to get a grip on where they are. If I can be of service, I'm happy to do that. But let me be abundantly clear. It doesn't matter that you call Bob Corcoran. It matters a lot that you call somebody like Bob Corcoran that actually has worked in this area. I wouldn't ask my advisor, whether it's a financial advisor or an attorney, can you do special needs planning? Because that's like asking me, Bob, can you swim the English Channel? Well, I took swimming lessons at the Y. I could probably do that. No, no, I can't do that. And no, I've never done it. You want to be dealing with people that do this kind of work and have done this kind of work. Um, this shouldn't be their first rodeo. With that, with that, that's really everything I have to say. I can look here and see if we have some questions. Mara, if you're still on, maybe you could give me a hand with that. Is anybody?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question or put a question in there. Oh, what is your contact info, Bob?
My contact info is, of course, it's back on the first slide, so
You could pop it in the chat too if you want.
I could do that. It doesn't.
This is recorded, so we'll send it out to everyone that registered, and I think we do that, and then it will also be on our YouTube page.
I will put it in the chat box here.
Another question just came through that says, "Do you have a list of special needs trust attorneys?"
Um, I I do. I have a list of attorneys I have worked with. That uh, I'm reluctant to make public endorsements in an environment like this, as you might imagine. I I'd be more than happy to tell you who I've worked with. Um, there are certainly other attorneys in the area that I have not had the opportunity to have worked with, but I can certainly speak to the ones that I've worked with. If you would, again, I'll give you my contact information. If you reach out to me with that question, I'll be more than happy to share that.
Any other questions? Bob just
I,
put his information in the chat. Lisa said thank you.
so either what I said was so monumentally confusing, or everyone already knows all this stuff. So I'm going to assume that I was too confusing. So
I do not think it was confusing. I think it is a lot of information to take in, and we're all probably digesting it and processing what we need to ask. And I have a feeling you'll be getting a lot of emails with some questions after the fact. I think everyone's probably just taking it in. It was very helpful. And Lisa just said the same thing. It was very helpful.
I will tell you, I've had people attend this workshop or one very much like it, and reach out to me 3 years later, 4 years later, and one in particular, 5 years after the fact. Um, I, when I do these in person, I hand out these little round wooden nickels, basically, with the letters TUIT on it, right? That people say, "Oh, yeah, that all sounds good, Bob. I'll do that when I get around to it." So I hand those out and say, "Well, now you have one. Start." Um, it's like eating an elephant, right? You have to do it one slice at a time. And whether you start with an attorney or start with an organization like DSAP or Achieva or whomever, or start with a financial advisor, start. I would encourage you because the world will not stop turning long enough for you to catch up. It just doesn't work that way.
I'm gonna stop the recording and then